Okay, well, the first thing that I'm going to say is a big thank you to our audience for tuning in today for episode 502 of the Simply Inspired podcast. Liam Hattery joining you again. As you can see, seaside. Most of our audience are used to this by now, but that's what I'm doing. And I'm joined by a very, very special guest. I am joined by Tom Macintosh, who is an esteemed and respected mindfulness teacher working to bring more clarity and calm to the workplace. Through his varied experiences in high pressure work environment, shall we say, reaching quite a high level in that, and then an amazing personal transformation through mindful practices to the work that he's doing now, helping a great deal of people. And today, what we're really doing, guys, is sharing the message that if you're in a high pressure work environment, if you're struggling in any way, if you're going through a process of transformation, any of these things, there are ways to live a more peaceful and calm existence. And it's as simple as that. You'll be able to take away some tips, some techniques, or just some inspiration, simply put, from this incredible guest today. And lastly, I'm going to say, I'm always amazed, even after 500 of these, or 502, it's incredible how we can reach around the world like this, all the way California to Cyprus. Absolutely amazing. And Tom, a big thank you also to you for coming on the show today. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Likewise, likewise. So, we will find out a little bit more shortly about the work that you're doing currently. But before we do, obviously going back in time and talking about the transformative experiences that you've been through, I think is just immensely valuable to so many people because of the relatability of that. I mean, it's as simple as that. Speaking of which, my mindfulness reminder is actually going off, so I'll just turn that off there. I have that's quite ironic, but yes, I would like to kick things off, please, by talking about the mindset that you had back when you were working in these high pressure environments versus the mindset that you have now. This is quite a big question to start things off with, but you've obviously been through a lot of change and a lot of transformation in this area. So, can we start off with that aspect, please?
Sure, sure. Um, I'm going to go back 20 years maybe to start. Um, about 20 years ago, I started working in Washington, D.C., in the field of information technology in uh, a large multinational law firm, uh, which had its benefits because I got to see a lot of the world, but it had its downside. And the downside was that it's an extremely pressure-filled environment. Um, when people can't bill their time in that kind of environment, it becomes very high pressure to get things fixed and solved and working right away. Um, I was on practically 24/7 because of the global reach of the organization and my position as one of the top managers in the IT team. Um, you know, I'd get phone calls at 2 in the morning from Brussels, um, Beijing, you name it. So it was a constant grind. It was um, to the point that around 2016, maybe, I hit a wall. I really hit a wall. And one day I couldn't go to work. I dragged myself in and I told my boss and I told human resources, I'm like, I gotta take a leave. I ended up taking a medical leave because I had gotten to the point where I could not function as a human being. Um, yeah, it was pretty intense. And shortly before hitting that wall, the my primary uh, care practitioner at a local medical facility had suggested, because I took the train every day from Baltimore down to Washington D.C. She suggested that I try practicing meditation, which, yeah, I had heard about it, hadn't really thought much about it, but I decided that I would try that on the train rides, and it seemed to help a little at first. But I think by the time I started that, um, things had pretty much progressed to the edge of the cliff already. So I could see that there was some light at the end of the tunnel, but I knew that if I kept doing what I was doing and didn't take a break, I would never get to the end of the tunnel. Um, so I, I can't remember how long it was. It was probably the better part of a month or so. And I started focusing, meditating, focusing on my breathing, really beginning to think more about what's important. Um, and, I still had to make a living. And I knew that at least um, on an interim basis, I would go back to doing what I was doing, but I would go back to it differently. Um, and I would learn how to not let the pressure do what it was doing to me. Uh, you know, um, it's it. We can't avoid the pressure at work. I mean, it's there. It's there. Um, but what we can do is get the folks that create the pressure to be more cognizant of how that impacts the workforce and the people who actually make it possible for them to do their work. Um, so I decided that eventually I was going to leave what I was doing and focus more on working with businesses and business leaders in developing mindfulness programs uh, in the workplace. And it was interesting because shortly before, about a year before COVID hit, the firm I was with in DC started developing what were called affinity groups. And every Wednesday at 2:30 in the afternoon, I would lead a meditation for all the offices around the world. And we got participation from every level of employee at the firm, from the folks that were in office services, the folks that were in the mailroom, to equity partners in the firm. So it told me that there's a need. When equity partners were showing up reliably every Wednesday in the yoga room in the building for this, and then when COVID hit, we kept it going on over. At the time, it was called Blue Jeans, which is basically a Zoom equivalent. We kept it going, and then eventually, though, the firm started cutting resources, and I ended up in California with a different firm. And then, now that I've retired from that that role as an IT person, I'm focusing more on bringing mindfulness into the foreground in the workplace.
Well, it's an incredible story, first and foremost. I appreciate the vulnerability of sharing that. I mean, I'm sure you speak about it often, but nonetheless, I always respect when people talk about the hard times for the benefits of helping others. And that is something I would like to touch on a little bit more deeply, as per the questions that I sent to you, which is obviously when
Mm-hmm.
you did hit the wall and when you did hit that sort of dark time, shall we say. You mentioned there about the month and about the recovery period and so forth, but I would like to go deeper into your advice for
Sure.
people who are in that place right now, right here, right now, basically.
For if you're in the dark place, um, first realize that nothing's permanent, um, and you know you may not have the luxury of being able to take a break like I did to focus, but if you do and you can do it, I would say do it. Take a break if you can afford to. The firm I was with had a very generous benefits program, so I could do that without taking a big financial hit. Um, if you can't take a break, find find activities and things that energize you outside of the workplace. You know, pick up a hobby, something that will take your mind away from what's bringing it down and give you some relief. One of my hobbies is photography. So uh, you know, going out and taking pictures would, looking at the pictures when I was done, was always a nice break. Um, you know, I I am a big fan of what I call in-person social networks, which means not using a screen. Um, actually in person. Um, you know, work on building, that human connection with other people who you can trust and who you can share some of your concerns with. Um, you know, um, I think it's important to have human contact, and I don't mean human contact via Facebook and Instagram and all those things. I'm not bad mouthing them; they're fine. It, but it's a great way to see and catch up with others. But also, uh, I think it gives people a false perspective on how everyone else is doing, because people generally share the good stuff on that, and they don't share their struggles. They don't share, you know, the yeah, the stuff that happens to them that they don't want others to know about. So I think that if your barometer is what you see on social media, um, it's not going to be accurate, and it's probably going to make you feel or think you're not doing as well as others. Um, so that's why I prefer in-person social networking, where you can sit down. I was fortunate because living in Baltimore was a town, still is a town that has I'm going to call it a stoop sitting kind of culture, and people would just go sit on their stoops and talk, which creates in the neighborhoods. It creates an in-person social network, just by virtue of that. But being able to have eyeball to eyeball conversations with people, I think is just so much more important. Especially if you're not feeling good about yourself and you're feeling the pressure from your job or you're feeling the pressure from other things, being able to break away from it and have conversations about other things. Um, the other thing I recommend is some kind of physical activity. Um, you get the endorphins going, and that can help. But some kind of physical activity on a somewhat regular basis, whether it's you know pickleball or skiing or power walking or running. I started running half marathons. Um, you know, not because I really enjoyed it, but um, for the physical benefits. But finding a physical outlet, finding in person kind of social network of some sort, um, developing a hobby that will pull your mind away from whatever it's circling around. I think are all really valuable things to do, and taking that first step can be a challenge, especially if you're really feeling it on your shoulders and you don't want to do anything. But taking that first step and actually doing something different, I think, can help break the cycle of pessimism that tends to develop when you're feeling overburdened and overstressed.
Absolutely. There's some great advice in there, Tom, and including the in-person social network aspect is absolutely incredible because you see real people. I mean, I think that's a really valuable insight. But everything, the exercise, everything you said. Before we go further, I have a very brief tangent. You mentioned about photography. I have to ask because I think I mentioned this to you about my background with photojournalism. Are those your photographs behind you, or are they ones that you purchased
The
elsewhere?
the the
I can.
one, whoops, wrong hand. That one, that one
Yeah.
there,
Yes. Yes.
that's I took that at Salisbury Cathedral a
Beautiful.
long time ago.
Beautiful.
So I did is I found this background and all the frames were just white backgrounds in them. So I clipped, I opened it up in I think it was 3D photo art or something, and I pasted pictures in. The one over on the other side, I skimmed off the internet someplace, but I just liked it, and I thought it added a little bit of contrast with the dark and the light and all of that. But yeah, the one from Salisbury Cathedral, I I photographed probably in 20, probably about 15 years ago. I actually have that one printed on canvas too. It looks really good on canvas.
It does indeed. Well, I was just curious. That one in particular actually was the one that drew my eye. They're both nice, but the cathedral just has a wonderful, wonderful feeling to it. So forgive
Yeah,
me for that.
that's a side room. It's like a side room at the cathedral. I just happened to wander into it and say, "Wow, I could get a really good depth perspective with all of the arches."
Absolutely. I love it. It's very, very beautiful, and it has a wonderful depth of feeling, as all good photographs must. Forgive me for the small tangent there.
That's okay.
Continuing with, it's just a shared passion of ours, so I had to ask. But
Hmm.
anyway, continuing with the questions that I had in mind for you. Now, you mentioned briefly about how your actual teaching and sharing the insights that you gained from mindfulness began. You touched on that
Hmm.
earlier. However, I'd like to go deeper into that in terms of the impact that you're having on so many people, Tom. It's as simple as that. I mean, you're helping a lot of people. You are leading by example in a lot of ways. And hopefully the sound quality is still okay, but not
Hmm.
ideal circumstances. Anyway, but yes, you are leading by example. As I said right at the beginning, I mean what I say hand on heart, where you don't just speak about these practices, you embody them, and that really comes over, by the way, just so I can say that. But how do you feel about all of the people that you're helping? I mean, that's the aspect that I would like to focus on for a moment, please.
It each person's different, um, and um, it, it's like a shared, almost like a shared journey. It in some cases it can take a little while to get to the point where you understand what it is that's holding them back or what it is that's creating this challenge for them. Um, but yeah, it feels really good when you see the progress begin to start. It's you know, personally, it's rewarding to see that, to see the changes and to realize that, through conversations and Zoom meetings and other things that um, you're making a difference for somebody in a positive way. Um, so it's personally to me it's rewarding. It it's not about how much money I can make to do it. I really that's inconsequential to me. But it's really um, it's seeing the progress. It's seeing the change unfold, and then knowing when you're not needed anymore. Knowing that, okay, maybe I'll hear from this person in a couple of months just to catch up because they've gotten back onto the trail they want to be on, and they're moving on and they're doing good.
Absolutely. Well, it's a beautiful thing to have that impact, and I know that that's a little bit different than the question I sent you because you touched on that, but absolutely the world needs more people like you, and that might sound very cliche, but it's absolutely true.
In yeah, in the perfect world, I wouldn't be needed.
Well, that's true.
Yeah,
That's true.
yeah.
Which actually,
And go
sorry,
ahead.
no, you go ahead. You go carry on, please.
I was going to say that there's two sides to this coin, so to speak. There's the impacted individual or individuals, but there's the individual who may not even realize that they're the ones creating that situation. And that's who I really want to start working with is I'll call it the source, for lack of a better expression. Um, you know, early in my career, looking back, there were things I did that I look back now and say, man, I shouldn't have said it that way at that time, or man, I shouldn't have reacted this way to that situation. Looking back, hindsight's always 2020, but being able to get to, for lack of a better expression, the C level in an organization, and help getting their buy-in that there are things they could be doing differently, um, to foster an environment. A lot of the pressure that people feel, a lot of the stress that people feel, could be internally generated because they're not perceiving something the way it was intended by the person who they now see as the source of the stress in their life. Um, and it could also be that the person who is the source of the stress doesn't realize that how they're saying something or their body language or their eye contact or facial expressions, how they're being interpreted by the people who depend on them for a living. Um, so that I would like to get more and more involved with the management level as opposed to the folks who are. I mean, I'll always be available to anybody, but I think that greater impact can occur by coaching the folks on top and helping them understand that yes, misunderstandings occur in the workplace, um, and there are things that can be done differently that they can soften that impact.
Absolutely. On the subject of softening the impacts of the way things are delivered, it's
Mhm.
interesting that I put in my questions here that the impact of the workplace can sometimes be jarring. And when I said that, I was referring to leadership positions. And really, the question here, Tom, is a topic that you'll be very familiar with, which is how we can develop more compassionate leadership styles. You're already talking about this, but I would like to go deeper into it
Okay.
because you said that just to give the context, one small thing, you said earlier about the pressure in terms of the people receiving the pressure, but the people applying the pressure. And you mentioned there a really, really valuable point about when you look back, you think, okay, maybe I could have said it this way, that way, and sort of tweak that a little bit. And the compatibility of a leader being a sort of powerful leader, if you like, somebody who charts the course, while still being compassionate, mindful, gentle, empathetic, these kinds of things, and the balance. It's something people have trouble grasping that you can be both. So I would just like to expand on the compatibility of those two things, if that makes sense, and some other
Sure.
leaders can do that. Thank you.
Sure. One of the things that that I that I try to communicate is that you know looking at how you respond to a situation. Um, a lot frequently I've seen people attributing intent where it really doesn't need to be attributed. And one of the things that I try to advise people to do is when you're beginning to attribute intent to something, to a person, get curious instead. gently ask questions, you know, instead of jumping to the conclusion that this person did this because they had some malicious intent, or they're unfit for the role. Just asking a question like, help me understand what you were trying to do, or that's an interesting perspective. Can you explain it a little bit further so I understand why you think this? Um, Stephen Covey, if you're familiar with Stephen Covey, you know, seek to understand before trying to be understood is one of the key tenets that he would talk about, and it really works. It works if the boss, so to speak, instead of saying it's my way or the highway, um, you know, asks people, well, what do you think about this? Or if he sees resistance, he detects that there's resistance, that he or she sees resistance to something, to just gently ask. You know, I get the sense that you're not on board with this. Help me understand what your thinking is. Um, you know, a dialogue. We have two ears and one mouth, and we probably should be using them in those proportions, but we generally don't. Um, but being more open to what the folks who report to you have to say or how they feel about things, I think can take a lot of the pressure off of the people that are chartered with executing on whatever the task is or whatever the project is.
Absolutely. Well, that's some very, very powerful and meaningful advice once again. And it's one of the important aspects because, as you've already said, it's one thing with the sort of grassroots aspect from the ground up, but it's another thing almost from the top down, starting with the
Mhm.
leadership position. So I love that work. Now, the last sort of two or three topics here that
Sure.
have in mind. I also had in mind to ask you as well if people are adapting within their work environment, as we have already discussed, that is relevant. But also when people are leaving their current role to find a new role. So you mentioned earlier about being with a different organization where you're based now, obviously Washington and California and these things. Uh, People can use mindfulness, I would imagine, to tune into, for want of a better term, what their ideal role would be, or they can use mindful practices within the job search, the corporate restructuring situation, which happens a lot and often
Mhm.
unexpectedly, these kinds of things. And some people might look at that and think, okay, Liam, that's an abstract connection. But actually, I would say that personally, the sort of inner work, if you like, that comes with this is very valuable to finding your ideal role. So, do you have any advice, mindfully speaking, for people who are going through a transitional experience of that nature, if that makes sense where I'm going with
Mhm.
this?
Mhm. Um, yeah, I think this is where I see mindfulness fitting into that. If you have been working on becoming, you know, more mindfully aware of yourself, and I'll try to bring it from the abstract to the less abstract. Uh, um, by practicing mindfulness, by practicing meditation and mindfulness that will come through that practice, you begin to become attuned to the way your body reacts to different things. And as you think about directions to go um, tune into what happens physically with those ideas. So, you know, if you think that, if you're thinking about a career changing occupations or a career change, or even just a company change, an employer change, tune into as you think about the decisions and you think about the options, tune into any physical elements that you feel as you're considering these things. Um, a kind of a side story. I had a professor I had the same professor as an undergraduate and a graduate student in behavioral statistics. And Jay Porter Tuck was his name. And he would say, trust your gut. Um, and he was using it as advice on tests. He'd say, when you're taking a test, your gut feeling is going to be close to 90% accurate. So thinking about that, when you're thinking through decisions, if you've practiced mindfulness and you've gotten to the point where you are becoming more attuned to what goes on physically as you think, um, really tune into those gut feelings, because I'm equating that mindfulness to the quote gut feeling that Jay Porter Tuck used to talk about as a test taking strategy. But by becoming more aware of how you react psychologically and physiologically to things, um, you know, when the mind and the gut are in harmony, you're probably going in a direction that's going to be rewarding for you. When the mind and the gut are not in harmony and there's dissonance between them, you should probably say, wait a minute, let me think about this a little bit more. You know, as you're aware, one of the common misconceptions people have about meditation is that your mind goes blank. It's like, no, if your mind goes blank, you've probably reached the end of your physical existence. Um, um, your mind doesn't go blank, but you begin to understand how what's going on in your mind interfaces with what's going on physically in your body. And flip side to that is you also then begin to realize when you feel some certain physical things going on in your body, whether or not you're becoming stressed or not stressed. And by tuning into the physical sensations, you can then, take a break or slow down, or if it's the right physical sensation, move forward at a faster pace in that direction. But really understanding how your body is reacting to things, I think, is very important. And some people are probably thinking that really sounds bizarre, but it works.
It does work, yes. And as I'm sure you've experienced a great deal, the intuition, the gut instinct, whatever term you use, amplifies somewhat with mindful practices. So I think that's also really valuable advice for people. Now, one of the last topics I have is you mentioned there about the misconceptions. And I think this is really interesting because you have been around mindfulness and meditation and these kinds of practices for a long time, in the sense that people's understanding has evolved, the social acceptance has evolved somewhat as
Mm-hmm.
well, and more
Yep.
people are aware of these things now. So, in terms of any other misconceptions that people have, I mean, there's probably quite a few, but if we had to pick sort of, two or three or four today that you would like to address, just to make people more comfortable with the process if they're new to it, I think that would be of value to people. So, what are your thoughts on that aspect, please, Tom, on the
So
misconceptions?
one of them that I hear a lot is that it's not science. It's not it's not it's not scientific. It's 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 you know it's just vapor. Um, and um, from my perspective, well, the program I went through to get certified as a mindfulness practitioner is actually run by somebody from the National Institutes of Health, um, who is a PhD in psychopharmacology, and through her own experiences started researching mindfulness, and you know um, was able to show benefits in things such as pain management, and other elements through actual scientific research. So the science is there, and the science does show that mindfulness brings value to people's lives, whether it's through pain management. As a matter of fact, during some of her research, they were able to determine that certain mindfulness practices actually were better than opioids at managing pain. So the science really is there that mindfulness does help you with various challenges in your life, and it's you know it's the science is there. You just have to know where to look to find it. Um, Another one I hear from people is that it's a religion. Mindfulness is a religion. Um, while many religions incorporate mindfulness, mindfulness is not specific to any given religion. And you can include religious elements in it if you choose to, but if you're totally secular, mindfulness can be totally secular. You don't have to be part of a religion or a cult um, to practice mindfulness. Yeah, there are spiritual aspects, and many of the Eastern religions have an aspect that include mindfulness, but there are also plenty of secular mindfulness approaches. Um, there's a there's an organization called Meditate Together, which um, has I think it's every hour on the hour. You can join a meditation, and to keep it secular, it's silent. And then at the end of 20 minutes of silence, there's a reflection prompt. But also to keep it secular, there's no chimes, there are no bells, there's nothing that could be interpreted by somebody as being part of any kind of a religious aspect. So there are programs that are completely secular. If someone doesn't want to feel like they're being forced into a religion by practicing mindfulness, there are secular approaches out there, and they can find them just by doing a search on the web.
That's a very valuable topic for different people's comfort levels, yes. And it's something I really like about what you do is that it is, um, how do I put this? Obviously very applicable, but essentially the secular aspect. I mean, personally, I'm open to some of the more spiritual aspects. I do actually interview some monks and practitioners in various traditions. But for people who are not comfortable with that, they need people like
Mhm.
you to back up the science, which is becoming quite extensive. So, very great topic. I think we've covered a lot of the sort of essential topics that I wished to discuss with you. I would like to give a very brief mention, though, to how people can contact you if you wish them to with relevant questions, queries, requests, or anything they'd like to know about this. From what I've seen as well, you put some great material out there. So I would like to encourage people to just um, find out more about what you're doing, even if they take it one step at a time. We can briefly mention that, and then I think we will wrap this up. But that's
Okay,
all. Thank you.
sure. My website is mindfulmoments.world, all one word, .world. Mindfulmoments.world. And you can send an email to Tom at mindfulmoments.world if you'd like any more information or want to share any thoughts. Um, those are probably the two avenues for reaching me.
Lovely. Reason I ask that is just because, well, going back to what you were saying about gut feeling, some people will have the gut feeling of saying, okay, I want to reach out to Tom or I want to do more research into this. So it's good to mention. Well, absolutely lovely. I mean, there's some very, very meaningful topics that we've covered today, and in a condensed enough timeline that people can listen to this and take away some of what you've shared and practically apply it, which is very important to me. That they're not just listening, thinking, "Oh, that was interesting," but they can actually put things into practice. So. I really appreciate you taking the time to share all of this early in your morning and to connect in this manner. I hope that you have a lovely rest of your day as you've got a whole day to go, and I'm obviously yes, a quick swim and then settle down for the evening. But no, I just really appreciate you speaking from the heart, sharing your experiences and everything that we've covered today. It's been absolutely wonderful and lovely. So thank you so, so much, Tom.
Thank you, Liam. It's great to be able to participate.
Absolutely. And as I've said already, it'll be of great value. I've learned a lot and I know other people will as well. So, yes, have a lovely rest of your day. I will send this to you as well when I
Okay.
release. Have any uses on your website, feel free. And I'll just keep an eye on what you're doing. Keep sharing the wisdom and the insights, and it really does help a lot of people. So thank you again and have a great day. Thank you so much.
You too. Take
Thank
care.
Take care. Bye now.
Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.